So today we're going to be testing the main difference you may feel when comparing the stock 24 and up KTM spring fork, or really all Austrian bikes, versus a cone valve setup. So this is WP's A-kit forks here, a couple generations old, but freshly serviced, about 10 hours of riding time. Service is done by Stillwell Performance in Scottsdale, Arizona. And a little bit of detail behind the setup here is 2024 KTM 300 XC, recently jumped off a 450, that's what these forks came off of, and went this route because I just was getting tired of all that bike. I'm having a great time with this 300 XC. It's bone stock. We have a FMF pipe on it, the shock is stock. I've just adjusted the clickers and it's set up for my weight. The spring from the factory is right around 170, 175 pounds. This is the spring rate. So I'm right in that ballpark, so it's been working out great for me. Tire setup, bone stock AT81s from Dunlop, 12.5 PSI, and triple clamps, super important if you haven't heard before, but the torque spec on triple clamps when you're testing forks and you want to get the best performance from your forks is super important. So on this bike, and I think it's a few others, but just specific to this bike, 17 Newton meter torque at the top, 12 Newton meter torque on the bottom triple clamp, and that's basically it. Clickers, I try to make as equal as possible. We're about 5 clicks hard from full soft, so should be fairly soft. We're in the desert here in Arizona, and the biggest thing I want to go over is, at least comparing them, is 4 things. It's comfort, how they feel in the bumps, and bottoming resistance, and then high speed stability. Race these in the Baja 400, these cone valves, and that's the biggest thing you generally pay for when you get A-kit stuff is predictability. So when the bike gets out of whack, you can kind of predict on what it's going to do, and you can generally ride faster because of that, because the comfort's there. You're more comfortable in landing a bit sideways. And when it goes high speed, or you really get rolling there, that's when you really feel the jittery bumps and if it feels like it wants to kill you or not. So cone valve setup is what I've been riding. I'm curious to see these new 24 forks since they're spring. I have about 20 minutes of riding time on them. They feel good, and let's see what happens. So I went out first on the setup I'm used to, so the cone valve forks. I really want to get warmed up, and been riding this setup for years. So 10 hours on the bike with the forks as everything sits now, and so this is me warming up on just the main turn track. A little bit of history of why I chose the cone valves. Been riding cone valves since 2019 when I got the KTM 450 with the air forks. The air forks never gave me any confidence in predicting what the bike was going to do. I had them serviced by multiple suspension companies and always felt they were unpredictable. So I rode a few A-kit cone valve setups over the years riding and racing motocross, and the predictability and dead feeling really inspires confidence. So that's the route I initially went. Now that I live in Arizona, I ride a lot of dry desert and a few select works races, so sandy, gnarly works races. So I ditched the 450 for the 300 recently for a lighter, more nimble feel, and I'm really glad I did that. I'm getting older, don't ride as much as I used to. The 450 is just a lot of bike. The 300, I feel like it's the vet weapon. I've been getting beat by a couple older guys on this 300 and decided to jump on the bandwagon, and it's really, really fun bike. So from what I understand, the WP cone valves are developed more towards motocross. They're not usually the top recommendation for off-road riding, but I had them and I've been riding them in rocks and desert and Baja, Arizona for the past few years, and I've been pretty happy. The biggest thing about the cone valves is you'll feel that they're a bit stiffer on the initial to mid-stroke, so it may feel a bit harsher on your hands compared to the stock setup. So chattery bumps, rocks, things like that, it tends to feel a bit harsh compared to other stock forks and other A-kit stuff for off-road. That's the biggest thing I notice. And when you ride the cone valve, and I'll be saying this a lot, but it really is just about predicting what the bike's going to do. It minimizes the effects of hitting obstacles and doesn't exaggerate a mistake. So, like if you're going down to the desert and there's a root or a rock and you hit it on the stock setup, it might deflect the front end, you might go off the trail, and it's one mistake into the next. With an A-kit setup, you really hit that, you feel that it was a mistake, or you hit something wrong, and you just move on. It continues to drive straight in most cases, so that's the biggest thing that you'll see and you'll feel. And it just keeps you in a straight line. An issue riding A-kit suspension is that you get used to being able to pull off sketchy things like that, so you got to be safe and careful when you go from bike to bike or setup to setup. So one thing to think about. And I will say this a bunch in this video, but really what it comes down to is predictability and getting comfortable with the bike doing weird things with the higher cost A-kit setup. That's really all this comes down to. So next, we're gonna jump into a few side-by-side comparisons here, and let's see what the main difference is in that comfort, bumps, bottoming resistance, and high-speed stability. Now we're off to switching the stock forks on. So warm-up is out of the way. I'm going to put the stock forks on and see how they compare. The 2024 300, they did a bunch of changes to the front forks. They went spring. So 23 and below were all air, and I've ridden a bunch of bikes for 24 on the 300, and the stock spring fork feels surprisingly good with the little time I've had on it. A lot of people like it. A lot of suspension companies also say that they really do like the stock setup. So the biggest thing to think about is the target rider weight is 170 to 175 pounds with your gear on. So if you're in that ballpark, it's going to be perfect. If you're above or below, get a spring kit, throw it in there. You should be really happy. Most people will love this setup stock. No need to spend too much money on fancy parts. And I did notice that changing the clickers made a huge difference on the stock fork. So I matched them to my cone valve setup from Stillwell, and it was 5 clicks in hard from full soft. So back the clickers all the way lefty-loosey to full soft, go in 5 clicks, hard on compression, and then rebound, I went all the way out, so lefty-loosey all the way out. So you open up the valve, quicker rebound. I went in 11 clicks, and it took the bike from feeling really skatey, head shaky, kind of dangerous feeling on the high speed to much more planted. The bike did not want to do weird things, and again, I'm going to use the word again, but predictable. It became a lot more predictable. I was really impressed by the stock suspension once you get the clickers dialed in. So let's see how they look side by side. This first clip is on the stock forks, and it's a super fast straightaway into some choppy, dry, slick bumps into a right-hand turn. The biggest initial impression, just swinging the leg over the bike, was the initial to mid-stroke was super plush and super, like, almost like riding on a cloud, to be honest. This clip here is the cone valve, which is harsher on the beginning to mid-stroke, which makes sense, right? That's what they're known for. The overall suspensions were super close in comfort and feel. This is side by side, cone valve left, stock forks on right, but they were pretty dang good. The stock fork impressed me quite a bit. I think the cone valve stayed on top of the bumps a bit better, but if you're a little bit of a slower rider, the stock setup is going to be more comfortable, and they're both very stable. The biggest thing I could kind of feel is on the stock setup, when I was trying to go fast and I'd make a mistake, like drop the inside elbow, the front end would start to wash. That was more common. So every mistake was amplified a bit, but it was marginal. It really was. It wasn't by much. This next section here is pretty similar, except it's a little bit slower of a pace here. So these are the cone valves, and the next video you'll see the cone valves on the left and the stock forks on the right for our comparison. Biggest difference that I felt was cone valves stayed up on top of the bumps, or at least it felt that way. So when I charged hard and I was harder on the brakes, I felt like I skipped across the top rather than the stock stuff, which would go down more in the bumps. This section here is 2 G outs, and use this for bottoming resistance just to see the difference. And the biggest thing is the O-ring on your fork tube. It was basically the same on each fork, so I was using exactly the same amount of suspension travel on each fork. The biggest difference that I saw was On the cone valve setup, if I got crossed up coming out of this corner, which there was kind of ruddy and nasty the more I rode it, I could enter this section all messed up. So I could fall down into the valleys of this or skim across. And on the stock setup, if I did that, I'd have to really pick that front end up and really carry that and drive the rear wheel down, just to make sure everything goes to plan. But really, the difference in the bottoming resistance here, it felt like 5%. That was really it. Maybe 8% again. So like the gap has really closed on these forks. If I had to go into a section like this really fast and just kind of close my eyes and hold the throttle on, I would pick the cone valves because I know that their bottoming resistance is top tier. Like, take it to the motocross track, you bottom those forks, you're not going to break your wrists. At least for the majority of the feeling, it won't feel like that, rather than the clank you get from most stock forks. But in instances like this, you're really not going to feel too much of a difference as long as the stock setup is set up correctly. And again, I'm 5 clicks in from full soft, so 5 clicks hard, and I'm from full open on rebound, so all the way lefty-loosey, I am 11 clicks in for rebound, and that's it. The last thing I wanted to check was just regular figure 8 riding. Like, this is a good warm-up for anyone out there. You don't need a whole lot of space. Just cut in a figure 8 and really work on your throttle control. And I wanted to see what the different forks felt like here. And just to keep it easy, they were basically the same. Slower speed stuff like this, and it being slick, there's really not much you can do. You can't really have a whole lot of lean angle traction. You really have to be careful of how far you lean the bike and on your inputs, so throttle and braking could be really, really smooth. So both forks felt identical here. The only thing is the stock forks are the initial and mid-stroke, like I keep saying, are a lot more plush, so it felt more like riding on a cloud. The cone valves, you felt like it was a little bit more of aggressive setup, so it was a bit stiffer feeling. But once you're in the turn and you're going through your figure 8s here, it was identical, really. I would be comfortable with either fork. I would give them both the same exact score, and that's really it. Now let's get into the ratings, because in the beginning we said 5 things, right? We want to see what the comfort was, the comparison, give it a rating scale from 1 to 10 on comfort, bumps, high speed stability, and bottoming resistance. So first off is comfort. Stock forks do take the cake on that. They're more comfortable. If you want a comfortable ride, then that's what I would choose, especially in the rocky, more technical riding. I don't think you're going to be unhappy with that. I gave the stock forks an 8 out of 10, and I gave the cone valves a 7 out of 10 when it comes to comfort of just riding regular trails like I'm riding here in the desert. They're pretty darn good. Now for bumps. When I mean bumps, I'm more talking about braking bumps and big, small braking bumps, things like that. I give the stock setup a 7 out of 10 and the cone valves a 9 out of 10. I do think the bumps sections are, if that's said right, I do think it's a lot easier to ride on the cone valves because it stays on top. It's a little bit harder of a feel, or a stiffer feel, and that's what I like. Next is the high speed stability. So wide open throttle, hauling booty through the desert, like type stuff. The cone valves are really good at that. They don't really get a whole lot of head shake, especially on the light 300. Gave it a 9 for cone valves. Stock suspension, gave it a 7. So a little bit more of a gap there when it comes to the higher speed stuff, especially if you hit a rock or a root or a hole. I would be a bit more nervous to carry full, like, wide open throttle, 5th or 6th gear on this bike on the stock setup than the cone valves. I think the cone valves would take care of you a bit more. Last, the bottoming resistance. I was really impressed by the stock forks. Bottoming resistance, I gave it an 8. It was awesome. I haven't ridden it at a motocross track yet. I'll be doing that next, but it was very progressive. I was really impressed. It didn't just clank through. No matter how hard I tried to hit stuff, even off video, I tried to splatter different sections, and it felt solid. But the cone valves does take the cake on that again. I gave it a 10 out of 10. I know from riding these forks, whether you're going off a jump or didn't see a hole in the desert and you're just full white knuckle mode, it's going to take care of you as much as it can. So the bottoming resistance feels a lot better. You don't get the clang through your bones on the cone valves, but the stock stuff, it felt darn good. I didn't make it do the clang through your bones. I didn't feel all that, but I do believe the cone valve is a little bit more forgiving when you're, again, hauling booty and you hit something big and you go, oh my God, and you pull it off. It doesn't kill your wrists. So to sum it up, the stock spring forks on the 24 and up Austrian bikes are really, really good. I was really impressed. I think 8 out of 10 people will be super happy with them as long as you fall in that 175 pound mark. So the springs front and rear are set to your weight. Just adjust the clickers and you'll be cruising. Whether it's rocky stuff or even moto or off-road, it should have a setting in there for you. Now, if you like to go super fast, if you like to push a bit more, jump into stuff, then that's where the A-kit really takes the cake, and predictability. That's really all it is knowing what the bike's going to do, not being surprised. That's all you really get with the A-kit stuff, and some bottoming resistance and slight things, but the gap between stock and A-kit, like kit forks, that gap's really shrinking these days, and it's really cool to see. These stock KTM Husqvarna gas bikes are really, really good machines.